Chapter 1. A corner store called Hometh bell above the door chimed with a gentle jingle as morning light filtered through the front windows of Reyes General. The small corner shop, nestled between a laundromat and the bakery on a quiet south side street, stirred to life like it did every day, slowly, warmly, with the soft hum of familiarity. Julian Reyes stood behind the worn wooden counter, fingertips brushing over the edge of the register as he counted in his head, placing a handful of quarters into the till with a satisfying clink. The world around him wasn't darkness, it was sound, scent, texture. He could feel the grain of the old floorboards beneath his shoes, hear the faint squeak of the door's hinges, and smell the comforting mix of ground coffee, cinnamon gum, and the faint floral tang of Mrs. Donnelly's perfume as she shuffled in, her cane tapping rhythmically against the linoleum. "Morning, Julian," she greeted. "Good morning, Mrs. Donnelly," he replied with a smile. Already reaching for the box of Earl Grey tea, he knew she came in for every Wednesday. "You've rearranged the display again, haven't you?" she teased, chuckling. "I nearly walked into a stack of paper towels, only a few inches to the left," Julian said, amused. "The lighting's better by the window. Also, I'm told." She left soon after, with her tea and a handful of peppermint candies he slipped into her bag for free. The store was like that, less a business and more a heartbeat of the block. People didn't just come for groceries or batteries. They came to talk, to rest, to feel known. Julian moved with ease through the shop, memorized patterns guiding his steps. Every aisle had a story. Aisle 2, where little Marco had once knocked over 3 jars of pickles. Aisle 4, where Mr. Singh shared daily updates on his garden. The world might have been noisy and fast outside, but inside Reyes General, there was rhythm, peace, and something softer. Julian brewed a fresh pot of coffee on the small back counter and poured himself a cup. The heat coiled up into the air, mingling with the warmth from the old radiator that buzzed faintly. He paused for a moment, leaning on the counter, listening to the quiet lull of mid-morning. This store was more than a livelihood. It was his sanctuary, his place of purpose. And though he could not see the sun rising over the Chicago skyline, Julian felt its warmth filtering through the glass, landing on his face. He smiled to himself. This was enough. This was home. Chapter 2. The woman in heels bell above the door rang again, sharper this time, less like a whisper and more like a warning. Julian's head lifted slightly, ears catching the distinct rhythm of heels clicking against the worn linoleum, not the hesitant shuffle of a regular customer or the bouncing energy of a child. This was different, precise, controlled, confident. "Hello." A voice called out, female, crisp, clear, a cadence honed in boardrooms, not bodegas. "Good morning," Julian replied, setting down the stack of receipts he'd been sorting. "Welcome to Reyes General. Let me know if you're looking for something in particular." There was a pause, just a breath too long. Then she responded, "Actually, I'm here for business. I'm Genevieve Langford from Langford Urban Development." Julian's fingers froze against the countertop. He knew the name. Everyone in the neighborhood did. They were the ones behind the shiny new buildings, downtown buildings, that didn't leave room for old corner stores with creaky floors and heart. "I see," he said slowly, keeping his tone neutral. "I believe your lease is due for renewal." Genevieve continued, her voice perfectly polished. "My firm is evaluating options for redevelopment in this area. I'm here to assess the property." Julian leaned on the counter with practiced calm, folding his hands. "So you're not here for batteries or bubble gum?" Her heels clicked again as she stepped closer. "No." He could smell her now, sharp citrus and something floral underneath. Clean, elegant. It reminded him of something. Maybe the way oranges smell just before they're sliced. "Well," he said, "the property may be old, but it's sturdy, much like the man running it." "I don't doubt that," she replied, and there was something unreadable in her tone. Surprise, perhaps. He imagined. She hadn't expected a blind man behind the counter. People rarely did. Julian turned his head slightly. "I may not be able to see you, Ms. Langford, but I get the sense you're not here to admire the charm. I'm here to do my job, and I'm here to keep mine." the air stretched taut between them. A quiet battle fought, without raised voices or slamming fists, just two people standing on opposite sides of something that neither of them could fully name yet. Finally, Genevieve cleared her throat. "I won't take much of your time. I'll return later with a team for measurements. You're welcome to look," Julian said, gesturing to the store. "But you won't find the soul of this place on a blueprint." She didn't respond to that. And after another moment of silence, her heels turned. The door opened again. The bell jingled. And just like that, the storm had walked out, but not before leaving behind the scent of oranges and a flicker of something Julian couldn't quite place. Chapter 3. The smell of oranges. Julian knew the moment she stepped into the store again. It wasn't just the brisk rhythm of her heels or the soft whoosh of the door. It was the scent, bright citrus with a floral undernote, that reached him before her voice did. He turned his head slightly toward the door, the corners of his mouth tilting upward with calm acknowledgement. "Back so soon, Miss Langford," he said, his voice light but laced with something watchful. Genevieve paused near the entrance, clearly surprised. "You remember me?" "I remember the perfume," Julian replied, tapping the side of his nose. "It lingers, like most things that make an impression." She let out a soft exhale, somewhere between a scarf and a laugh. "I wasn't sure you'd be open to talking." "That depends. Are we talking about tearing down the shop today, or something more pleasant?" Genevieve hesitated, her fingers trailing lightly across the edge of a nearby shelf as she took in the space again. The store wasn't glamorous faded signs, shelves that leaned just a little, the warm scent of coffee mixing with old wood and candy jars, but there was something deeply human about it. It pulsed with life in a way most of her polished world never did. "I was curious," she admitted. "You're not exactly what I expected," Julian chuckled. "I get that a lot." She moved a little closer now, examining the layout, while Julian stood quietly behind the counter, listening. Her eyes swept over the small handwritten signs, the rack of greeting cards, the vintage register that clanked when it opened. "This place," she said, almost to herself. "It shouldn't work. And yet, it does," Julian finished for her. "Because people need places like this, places where they're more than a sale." Their eyes didn't meet. His gaze remained steady ahead, and hers lingered on his face a beat longer than necessary. He didn't see it, but he felt her presence taller than he imagined, composed, but just a little frayed at the edges. "Is it strange that I keep coming back?" she asked suddenly, almost catching herself off guard. Julian's smile returned, softer this time. "Not at all. Sometimes we return to the places that unsettle us, because they show us something we're not ready to face." Genevieve stiffened slightly. "What do you think I'm trying to face, Mr. Reyes?" "I don't know," he said gently. "But you keep walking through that door. That says something." There was a long silence before she murmured, "It's just business." Julian nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe it's more." She didn't reply. She only stood there for a moment longer, fingers brushing the counter as if grounding herself. Then, with a faint sigh, she turned and walked toward the door. And just like before, the scent of oranges lingered behind, faint, bright, and unforgettable. Chapter 4. Coffee and compromise. Rain came down in sheets that afternoon, drumming against the windows of Reyes General like impatient fingers. Julian had just finished sweeping near the door when he heard it. The door creaked open, followed by the unmistakable tap of heels, now softened by soaked pavement. Genevieve Langford stepped inside, her coat dripping, hair damp, and posture just slightly less composed than usual. For once, she didn't glide. She looked human. Julian tilted his head, sensing the change. "Didn't bring an umbrella?" She gave a small, breathy laugh. "Didn't expect the sky to open up halfway through a meeting." "You're in luck," he said, gesturing toward the back of the store. "The coffee's still warm. Sit, dry off." Genevieve hesitated. She wasn't used to being told what to do, especially not gently. But something about the quiet calm of the store, the way the warm air wrapped around her like a wool blanket, made her nod and move toward the small wooden table near the back window. Julian poured her a mug, his movement slow but practiced. "Milk and sugar, just black, "Thanks," she replied, watching him with curious eyes. He handed it to her without hesitation, setting the cup down in front of her with perfect precision. "You sound tired." "I am tired," she admitted, wrapping her hands around the mug. "It's exhausting always playing the part, always being the woman who knows." Julian leaned against the counter nearby, listening without pressing. "They want to turn this whole block into something shiny," she continued, "something glossy for tourists and investors. But this place," her eyes drifted around the shop, "it's stubborn. It doesn't apologize for its imperfections." Julian smiled. "Sounds a lot like me." Genevieve let out a real laugh, this time soft, surprised. "You're impossible." "I've been called worse." A comfortable silence settled between them as the rain softened against the glass. Julian moved around the counter, checking stock, but always aware of her presence. She watched him, how he moved with surety, how he knew this space like an old friend. "Why do you keep this place?" she asked suddenly. He paused. "Because it keeps me. I may not see the world like everyone else, but here, I feel it. The people, the stories. It's not just a store. It's a memory in motion." Genevieve stared into her coffee. "Do you think people like me ever have a place like that?" Julian considered. "I think people like you are still looking." She didn't answer, but something in her expression shifted, like a corner of her armor had loosened. The rain began to slow, the city humming quietly beyond the fogged windows. "I should go," she said finally, standing up and straightening her coat. Julian nodded. "Next time, bring an umbrella." She glanced at him, lips curving into something that might have been a smile. "Next time." He shrugged. "People don't wander into places like this twice unless they want to." As she stepped back out into the grey drizzle, the bell chimed once more. Julian stood in the quiet after, his fingers wrapped around his own cup of coffee, and felt the echo of her presence like warmth on a glass after breath. She'd be back. Chapter 5. Echoes of a past. Genevieve Langford stared at the ceiling of her penthouse apartment, the city glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like a sky full of artificial stars. The clink of ice in her untouched Scotch glass echoed faintly, the only sound in a home far too silent for comfort. She had spent the entire evening trying to focus on quarterly reports and new acquisition briefs, but her thoughts kept drifting back to a worn shop with creaky floors and a blind man who saw straight through her. She hated that dock. She hated how Reyes General clung to her thoughts like the scent of old books and cinnamon gum. But more than that, she hated how it reminded her of everything she'd buried beneath ambition and boardroom bravado. Her father's voice returned, sharp and always hovering just behind her shoulder. "The world doesn't hand power to emotional people, Genevieve. You lead, or you get left behind." She had learned that lesson young, when her mother left, when the boardroom replaced bedtime stories, when the Langford name became more brand than family. Genevieve had armored herself with spreadsheets, mergers, and perfectly tailored suits. Emotions were messy, love was unreliable, control was her currency. And yet, that store, that man, there'd been something unsettlingly calm in the way Julian spoke to her. Not with flattery or intimidation, but with quiet honesty. He didn't shrink beneath her title or pedigree. He didn't try to impress or challenge her. He simply saw her, or rather, heard her, and still treated her like a person, not a threat or a deal to be closed. The next morning, she returned. She told herself it was professional, another assessment of the property, a closer look at the space, but she walked slower this time. She noticed the way children gathered near the candy shelf, how the elderly gentleman at the counter greeted Julian with a pat on the arm and a story about his wife's meatloaf. She noticed Julian's laugh, genuine, deep, the kind that settled in your chest and warmed the places you forgot were cold. "Back again?" he asked, sensing her presence the moment she stepped inside. "I needed a distraction," she replied. "You came to the right place. We're full of them: expired cereal, strange gossip, and children who think hiding behind the chip rack makes them invisible." She let out a breath, more amused than she wanted to admit. "You really don't mind me coming back?" "I mind when people come to take, not when they come to see." Genevieve felt her throat tighten. Each visit chipped at her carefully built exterior. Each conversation pulled her a little further from the cold orbit she'd called success. And each moment she spent in that corner shop reminded her of a different version of herself, a girl who once dreamed of art and travel and warmth. Before she learned to mask her heart with power, she had forgotten how to be that girl. But Julian, without even knowing her face, was beginning to show her the way back. Chapter 6. The touch of change. A Saturday morning sunlight stretched across the pavement outside Reyes General, dappling the storefront with a soft golden hue. Inside, the usual hum of chatter had quieted to the gentle voice of Julian Reyes kneeling on the floor beside a child no older than 8. "Feel that?" Julian said softly, guiding the boy's small fingers across a page of Braille. "That's the letter L. It has a slight bump in the top left and middle. Try it again." Slowly, the boy nodded, tongue peeking out in concentration, his fingertips exploring the dots with careful reverence. Genevieve stood near the back, unnoticed, her hand resting loosely on the edge of a shelf. She hadn't meant to interrupt. She had only stopped by to drop off some redevelopment paperwork she knew Julian would refuse to touch. But now, she couldn't bring herself to speak. She watched as the blind shopkeeper taught by feel and patience, his voice gentle and encouraging, like the soft pressure of a guiding hand on your back. The boy lit up with each success, the smile on his face pure and radiant. "There you go," Julian said, ruffling his hair. "That's love. Love. One of the best words to learn first." Genevieve swallowed hard. The boy ran off to show his mother, leaving Julian to stand, brushing off his jeans. That's when he turned, angled just slightly toward her. "You're quiet today," he said, a trace of amusement in his tone. Genevieve walked toward him slowly, feeling out of place in a sleek navy slacks and crisp blouse amidst shelves lined with worn labels and sun-faded posters. "I didn't want to interrupt," she said, softer than usual. "You didn't. He's been learning to read with touch since his vision started fading. Comes in once a week." "Bright kid." Genevieve nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I didn't know you did that. I don't advertise it, but the world teaches you enough hard lessons. Sometimes it's good to help someone learn something kind." She looked at him, then really looked. The way he stood tall, head slightly tilted, hands relaxed at his sides. There was no bitterness in him, no resentment for what life hadn't given, only this deep, unshakable peace that made her chest ache. "Why do you do it?" she asked. "Help people like that boy." "Like me." Julian raised a brow. "You don't need help, don't I?" Her voice cracked slightly. He tilted his head. "Maybe not the kind you think." There was a silence between them, thick with meaning. Genevieve shifted her weight, heart tight with something she didn't yet understand. She had climbed to the top of the city's towers, but standing here in this quiet shop, she felt like she was finally on the ground. That night, back in her apartment, Genevieve sat by the window with her tablet untouched on the coffee table. Her fingers traced the rim of a teacup as she closed her eyes and listened to the rain, to the faraway hum of traffic, to the echoes of a blind man teaching a child to feel the word love. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't dream of skyscrapers. She dreamed of laughter. Chapter 7. A city walk in the dark. It was just past closing when the last customer filtered out of Reyes General, leaving behind the soft creak of the door and the lingering scent of warm bread from the bakery next door. Julian wiped down the counter in slow, practiced movements, each gesture as steady as the rhythm of his breath. Genevieve stood near the entrance, arms folded loosely, watching him. The overhead light cast a golden glow across the store, turning dust motes into glitter. She hesitated before speaking. "Do you walk home alone every night?" Julian paused, then chuckled. "It's not like I've got a guide dog hiding in the back." "Yes, I walk." Genevieve stepped forward, fiddling with her sleeve. "Would you mind if I joined you?" Julian lifted his head toward her voice. "You offering to walk me home, Miss Langford?" "I'm offering to walk with you," she replied. "There's a difference." A moment passed. Then, with a smile that was more curiosity than caution, Julian nodded. All right then, let's go. Outside, the city shimmered with the soft glow of street lamps. It was one of those rare nights when Chicago's wind had settled, leaving the air still and cool, heavy with the scent of wet pavements and distant summer flowers. Julian moved confidently, his cane tapping in rhythm beside him. Genevieve stayed close, but not hovering. She watched how he moved fluidly, listening intently, adjusting his steps with the smallest of cues. "You navigate better than most people with perfect sight," she said after a while. "I see more than people think," he answered. "When your eyes stop doing the job, everything else sharpens. Sound, smell, feeling." He stopped at a corner, tilting his head slightly. "There's a jazz band playing down the block, probably outside Bruno's." Genevieve listened. Sure enough, faint notes of a saxophone curled through the air, playful and raw. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. "Seeing the world?" Julian took a moment before replying. "Sometimes, but I don't mourn it. I've got a different kind of view now, one that doesn't get distracted by the surface." Genevieve looked at him, then not his cane, or his glasses, or the scars time had pressed gently into his skin, but at the stillness in his expression, the depth in his voice. She felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar inside her chest. "Tell me what you see right now," she asked, softer. Julian turned slightly toward her. "I hear the city humming beneath the silence. I smell that floral perfume you wear, orange blossom. I feel the breeze picking up. And you." He hesitated. "What about me?" she asked. "I feel you thinking too hard." Genevieve laughed, surprised by the warmth that bloomed behind her ribs. "I guess I am." They stopped in front of a small brick building with ivy climbing the walls. Julian reached for the gate and turned toward her. "Well," he said, "this is me." Genevieve lingered on the sidewalk, the glow from a street lamp painting halos in her hair. "Thanks for letting me tag along. Thanks for not grabbing my arm every 5 seconds. He teased gently. "I wasn't sure if I should." "You did just fine." They stood in silence for a moment. No rush, no pressure, just the soft sound of jazz fading down the street, and the city holding its breath. "Good night, Julian." "Good night, Genevieve." She turned to walk back, her heels softer now on the pavement. Julian listened to her footsteps until they disappeared into the night. And for the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel quite so empty. Chapter 8. When the world-cracked wind had returned to Chicago, curling through the alleyways like a restless spirit. Inside Reyes General, the bell above the door jingled, but it wasn't the welcoming sound it had once been. It felt colder now, more abrupt. Julian sensed it right away. Genevieve's presence, yes, but also the change in her. Her steps were tighter. Her voice, when she spoke, lacked its usual silk and steadiness. "Hi," she said, setting a folder on the counter. Julian turned his head slightly. "You sound like someone bringing bad news." "I didn't want to drop it off with a messenger." He moved slowly, his fingers brushing the folder, but not opening it. He didn't need to. The heaviness in her voice told him everything. The board, the pressure, the deal. He could feel it pressing down on her like invisible weights. "They're not backing down," she said quietly. "Langford Development wants to move forward." Julian's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "And what do you want?" She hesitated. "I don't know anymore." The words landed between them like a crack in the pavement, visible, undeniable. Julian stepped away from the counter, pacing slowly behind it, letting the silence stretch. The hum of the old refrigerator in the corner filled the void. "I thought maybe we were building something," he said. "Not just between us, but for this place, for this community." "So did I," Genevieve said, her voice small. He stopped moving. "Then what changed?" "My father called a vote. They pushed it through. I tried, Julian. I swear, I tried." Julian took a deep breath. "But you didn't tell them no." Genevieve flinched. "It's not that simple." He nodded once, slowly. "It never is, when your life is built on compromise." She stepped closer, desperate now. "I wanted to find a way to save this place without losing everything I've worked for. And in trying to protect everything, you ended up protecting nothing." The pain in his words wasn't loud, it was quiet, restrained. "That made it worse." Julian reached for the folder and tucked it beneath the counter without a word. Maybe I expected too much, he murmured. But for a little while, I thought, you saw this place, not just with your eyes. I thought you saw me. I do, she whispered. But he had already turned his back. Genevieve stood frozen for a moment. The world outside moved on, cars rushed by. Horns honked. Someone laughed down the block, but inside Reyes General, time stood still. The shop didn't feel warm anymore. It felt hollow. Chapter 9. The broken mug crash was small, but sharp ceramic hitting tile. Then silence. Julian stood over the shattered pieces of his favorite coffee mug, the one with the faded blue rim and tiny crack in the handle he always felt with his thumb. He hadn't dropped a mug in years. Damn, he muttered, crouching down carefully and reaching out to feel for the shards. A soft gasp came from the doorway. Let me help. Genevieve's voice. Julian stiffened. She was the last person he expected or wanted to see today. I've got it, he said flatly, gathering the pieces with slow precision. But Genevieve was already kneeling beside him, gently brushing his hand aside and collecting the broken fragments into a paper napkin. You don't have to do this, he said. Neither do you, she replied. But we're both here anyway. He let out a breath, long and tired, and leaned back against the counter. Genevieve sat beside him on the cold floor, the mug's broken pieces between them. I used to come here with my nanny when I was 5, she said suddenly. We'd buy lemon drops and coloring books. It always smelled like cinnamon and old paper. I never told you that. Julian turned his face toward her voice. No, you didn't. This store. It was the last place I felt safe before everything changed. Before my mother left. Before my father turned my life into a schedule and a checklist. She ran her fingers over the jagged edge of a mug shard, careful not to press too hard. You were right. I didn't say no to them. I wanted to find a way to win both sides. But I ended up losing you. Julian's voice was quiet. It wasn't about winning, Genevieve. It was about choosing. You just didn't. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. I was scared, not just of losing my job, but of feeling too much. I've spent my whole life building walls. Then I met you, and suddenly the walls didn't fit anymore. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached toward the floor, fingers brushing over one of the larger pieces of the broken mug. This belonged to my mother, he said softly. She used to drink coffee from it every morning before walking me to school. After I lost my sight, I kept it because I remembered the way it felt in my hands. Some things, some people, you hold on to even after they break. Genevieve's throat tightened. Is there any chance we can fix what we broke? Julian's fingers paused over the ceramic piece. Then, gently, he set it aside and turned to face her. Maybe, he said, but only if we stop pretending we're not already in the middle of something real. She met his words with silence, but her hand reached out, barely brushing his. This time, he didn't pull away. They sat there on the shop floor among broken pieces. Hard truths, and something unspoken beginning to mend. Chapter 10. The proposal not that kind. The Langford development boardroom was all glass and gleam-polished floors, cold lighting, and a table long enough to seat 12 executives, each armed with laptops and clipped tones. Genevieve sat at the head, flanked by her father on the right and a spreadsheet projecting sales forecasts on the wall to her left. It was everything she had once worked for, everything she had built her identity around, but her fingers tapped restlessly on the table's edge, her thoughts far from the charts and line items. They were back in a little corner store with mismatched candy jars, hand-labeled stock, and a blind man who had shown her the texture of truth. I'd like to propose an amendment to the current redevelopment plan, she said clearly, interrupting a discussion about projected ROI. The room fell quiet. Her father narrowed his eyes. This had better be good. Genevieve didn't flinch. She stood and walked to the front of the room, opening a new slide, a map of the block. But this time, Reyes General was circled in green, not red. I'm suggesting we preserve the store, she said. Integrate it into the new design as a heritage fixture, restore its exterior, upgrade what's needed, but keep it in operation. A long pause. That shop brings in less than 1% of the projected revenue for this development. one of the board members pointed out. It's emotionally symbolic, but financially, emotion has value. Genevieve cut in. So does legacy. That store has been there 4 decades. It serves the community. It gives people more than coffee and canned soup. It gives them belonging. That matters. Her father leaned forward. Are you seriously suggesting we compromise the entire vision for a sentimental corner store run by a blind man? I'm saying we stop pretending that bulldozing culture and community is the only way to grow, Genevieve said, her voice rising not with anger, but conviction. We build towers, yes, but we can also build trust. If we don't, then what exactly are we leaving behind? Silence again, but this time, it was uneasy. You're letting your personal connection cloud your judgment, her father said, voice low. She met his eyes without wavering. Maybe for the first time, I'm actually seeing things clearly. The vote didn't go her way. The board overruled her proposal, and her father made his disappointment public with a pointed speech about professionalism and priorities. But Genevieve didn't flinch, didn't shrink, because as she packed up her files that afternoon, she realized something. Her proposal wasn't just about saving a store. It was about saving a part of herself. Later that evening, she stood outside Reyes General with the wind tugging at her coat, folder still in her hand. She didn't go inside. Not yet, but she would. And when she did, it wouldn't be with blueprints or numbers. It would be with something far more valuable. Her truth. Chapter 11. Love in Brayleth City was hushed under a late summer night. The kind of silence that made everything feel closer, more intimate. Inside Reyes General, the lights were low, the air still tinged with the warm scent of coffee and the faintest trace of jasmine from the bouquet by a local florist earlier that day. Julian sat behind the counter, fingers resting lightly on a well-worn Braille alphabet guide he kept tucked in a drawer for the neighborhood kids. He didn't expect anyone this late, especially not her. But then, the bell above the door chimed softly, like it was holding its breath. He turned his head slightly, already knowing. I was wondering if you'd come, he said quietly. Genevieve's voice was just above a whisper. I didn't want to wait any longer. She stepped further into the store, her heels echoing softly across the floor until she reached the counter. Tonight, she wore no armor, no boardroom confidence, no sharp lines or polished indifference, just a soft cardigan, a ponytail, and eyes that held something unguarded. I want you to teach me, she said. Julian's brows lifted. Teach you what? She placed her hands gently on the counter. Braille. He paused, reading the air between them. Why? Because I want to understand, she said, her voice cracking just enough to let something real slip through. Not just you, but the way you see the world. I've lived my life reading people by their titles and their suits, but you read by touch, by tone, by heart. I want to learn that language. Julian stood slowly and came around the counter, holding the guide between them. Okay, he said softly. Then we start with A. He gently took her hand and placed it over the raised dots. Her breath caught just slightly as their fingers touched. This is A, he murmured. 1 dot, top left, she nodded, her eyes fixed on the paper, even though her focus was entirely on the sensation beneath her fingers. B, she asked, letting her index finger drift slightly. 2 dots, top left and middle left. Like a breath and a pause, their hands moved together, slowly, steadily, exploring the alphabet. But it wasn't about the letters anymore. It was the way her hand fit in his, how his thumb brushed hers to guide her, how the silence between them was full, not empty. At one point, their fingers lingered over the word hope. Genevieve looked up at him. What does this one mean to you? Julian tilted his head. It means you came back. They were close now, closer than before. Her hands still rested in his, the Braille guide forgotten between them. Genevieve's voice dropped to a whisper. Julian. His free hand moved to the edge of her wrist, fingertips tracing gently, as if to memorize her. Don't say anything you're not sure of. I've never been more sure of anything, she said. They leaned in slowly, achingly, and just before their lips met, the bell above the door rang sharply as wind burst in from the street. They pulled apart instinctively, startled, but it didn't matter. The almost kiss was enough for now. Genevieve looked down at their joined hands, her fingers still brushing the word hope. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to rush forward. She was already exactly where she needed to be. Chapter 12. The Betrayal of Silence. Storm didn't come with thunder or lightning, it came with headlines. Langford Development confirms full redevelopment plans, no exceptions for local businesses. The news spread like spilled coffee, fast, hot, and impossible to clean up. Within hours, it was taped to the bulletin board at the deli, whispered in line at the bakery, and printed in bold ink on Julian's countertop, left by someone who didn't have the heart to say it aloud. Julian stood in the middle of Reyes General, the paper in his hand, fingers tracing over the headline like he was trying to find meaning in raised ink. His face was unreadable, but his silence said everything. She hadn't told him, not when it mattered. The bell jingled around noon, and a wave of tension entered with Genevieve. She wore her hair down today, like she used to, but her steps were unsure. She saw the newspaper in his hands and didn't need to ask. "I wanted to explain," she said, voice tight. Julian didn't turn around. "You don't need to." "I do," she said, stepping closer. "I fought for you, for the store. They shut me down, overruled me. I thought I could buy time, find another way, but you didn't tell me," he said quietly, finally facing her. "You let me find out like everyone else." Genevieve's throat tightened. "I didn't know how. I was trying to fix it first. I didn't want to disappoint you. You didn't want to face me," Julian said. "There's a difference." The silence between them thickened, heavy and cold. Outside, the wind scraped dry leaves across the sidewalk. Inside, the warmth that had once lived in this space seemed to have retreated into shadow. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. Julian nodded slowly. "But you did." Her eyes shone with something sharp: regret, shame, longing. "I came back for you. Not the job, not the project. You." Julian's expression softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "And I believed in that," he said. "More than I should have." The words landed like a closing door. Genevieve took a slow step back, her heart shattering in the quiet. She had been so close. Close to honesty, close to love, but silence had cost her both. She turned and walked out, the bell above the door jingling faintly in her wake, and Julian stood alone in the store, the headline still in his hand, his heart aching in a language that needed no sight to understand. Chapter 13. Seeing through the dark, rain had passed by morning, leaving behind a softened sky and streets damp with the memory of last night's storm. Julian stood in the shop, refilling a candy jar, pretending not to notice how the silence pressed against the windows like a weight. Since the headline, customers came and went quickly, offering him tight smiles and mumbled sympathy. But what hurt more than the news was her absence. No citrus perfume, no voice laced with quiet defiance, no footsteps that made the floorboards sing. She was gone, or so he thought, until he heard her voice just outside, on the sidewalk. She wasn't speaking to him. She was speaking to someone else, and the walls of Reyes General were thin enough for secrets to slip through. "I said no to him," Genevieve's voice said, sharp and trembling. "To my father. I told him he was wrong. I told the board we were wrong, and I was willing to walk away. All for a place they think is beneath their notice." Julian froze, his hands still. The other voice, deep and condescending, belonged to her father. "And what did it get you, Genevieve? Sentiment doesn't sign checks. Loyalty doesn't drive profit. You don't understand," she snapped. "This isn't just a store. It's someone's entire world. It's a place people need. You build towers, Dad, but you don't build anything that lasts. And you don't understand people who do." Julian's chest tightened. She hadn't stayed silent. She had fought. Her father's response was cold. "If you walk away from this, you walk away from everything we've built. Then maybe it's time I build something of my own," she said, voice breaking slightly. Julian stepped closer to the door, heart pounding not with anger this time, but something dangerously close to hope. He didn't open it. He didn't interrupt. But when the conversation ended and her footsteps faded into the morning haze, Julian stood alone in the shop with 1,000 thoughts rushing through him. He had misjudged her. She hadn't betrayed him with silence. She had battled in rooms where he would never be invited, rooms filled with glass walls and sharp suits, and she'd chosen him. And now, for the first time since he met her, he didn't just feel her presence. He saw it. Not with his eyes, but with something far more real. Chapter 14. A home with her in its shop felt different that afternoon. The sunlight stretched longer across the floor, catching in the dusty air like gold threads. Julian stood behind the counter, his hands lightly resting on the wood, waiting not for customers, not for deliveries, but for something else. Someone else. The bell above the door jingled softly. He knew it was her. She didn't speak right away. Her heels clicked once, then stopped. He could hear the hesitation in her breath, the storm of doubt and apology tangled in her silence. "Hi," she said at last, her voice small, uncertain. "I wasn't sure if I should come back." Julian turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable. "And yet you're here." Genevieve stepped further into the shop, slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure if the floor would hold her. "I meant what I said," she continued. "I stood up for this place, for you. I lost more than I expected, but I'd do it again. I didn't come to defend myself today. I came to ask if there's anything left between us worth rebuilding." The words hung in the air, trembling. Julian walked around the counter, stopping a few feet from her. She looked smaller than before. No power suit, no carefully practiced poise. Just a woman standing in a place that once made her feel seen. He reached out and gently found her hand. "I heard you," he said softly. "Out there, with your father." "I heard everything." Genevieve's eyes glistened. "Then you know I didn't give up." "I know," he whispered. He traced his fingers lightly over her knuckles, grounding himself in the only way he knew. "This place, it's not much, but it's mine. It's worn and patched and imperfect." Her voice shook as she replied. "So am I," he smiled faintly. "That's why I think you belong here." She looked up at him then, hope flickering like a candle in her chest. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying," Julian interrupted gently, "you were the light in this place long before the rest of us noticed." Her breath caught. And then she laughed, a soft, unguarded sound that cracked the tension in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. They stood there, fingers still entwined, surrounded by shelves of candy, dusty romance novels, and boxes of cereal, things that didn't match, but somehow belonged together, just like them. The store was still imperfect, so were they, but it was theirs, and now it had a home with her in it. Chapter 15. The blind shopkeeper's half-new sign above the door wasn't flashy. Just a simple wooden plaque, hand-painted by one of the neighborhood kids, hung with twine and pride, Reyes General. Since 1983 beneath it, in smaller letters, someone had added, "Some things are worth seeing with the heart." The store hadn't changed much on the outside. The windows still held smudges, the bells still jingled off-beat, and the awning still sagged a little at the corner. But inside, everything felt new, not because it was shiny, but because it was full. Shelves were tidier, the register was upgraded, though Julian still preferred the sound of the old one. A small reading nook had been added near the back with a braille book collection and worn cushions. Kids came after school to do homework. Neighbors stopped in just to chat. And behind the counter stood Julian, his hands still steady, his smile still soft, but something in him had opened. Like a door that had always been there, waiting to be pushed. He turned as he heard the familiar rhythm of footsteps approaching soft flats today. Not heels, and that unmistakable trace of citrus and jasmine trailing in behind. "You're late," he teased. Genevieve leaned on the counter, holding to coffees. "You're early." She handed him his cup, black, one sugar, just how he liked it. He took it with a smile and reached for her hand, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "You still thinking of rebuilding skyscrapers?" he asked. "I'm thinking of rebuilding stories," she said. "Maybe places like this. Maybe lives that matter more than floor plans." Julian nodded. "I like that." They walked outside together, side by side, and sat on the wooden bench beneath the awning. The afternoon sun filtered through the buildings, painting the sidewalk in warm light. He turned his face toward the warmth. "I used to think I'd live my whole life in the dark. But then someone walked in and changed everything." Genevieve's fingers laced with his. "You were never in the dark, Julian. You just needed someone to remind you the light was still there." He smiled, leaning back, listening to the hum of the city, the voices of children laughing nearby, the rustle of paper bags, and the quiet comfort of her presence beside him. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man limited by sight. He felt like a man who had found everything. And in that tiny store, on a sun-warm street in Chicago, the blind shopkeeper's heart saw the world and her with more clarity than he ever thought possible.